Does that have a cost on the starting point of the 2026 projects? Yes, it's unavoidable. Will we do the same thing? Yes, we will do the same thing. Again, if we had to do it. Does this explain all of our difficulties today? No, it will be using that as an excuse, and nobody is looking for an excuse here. But it's a combination of things, and you will walk around as a campus and you will find the same fire than what you have seen last year in the second part of the year, where people know that they have complex issues to sort out for our car to be competitive again. But there is no greatest motivation than to think, let's do it again.
Well, listen, I can see that fire in your eyes. And yet people will read and they know about the people who have left this team over the last few years. It's a process that began before you took over.
Falling apart. That is the only honest way to describe what is happening at Red Bull Racing right now. Not a dip, not a rough patch. A team that won 22 of 23 races in a single season just 3 years ago is sitting 6th in the Constructors' Championship, behind Haas and Alpine, watching its star driver contemplate walking out the door, losing key engineer after key engineer to rival teams, and fielding a car its own drivers have called terrible. And at the center of all of it, handed the most impossible job in Formula One, is Laurent Mekies. From being brought in to replace the sacked Christian Horner mid-season, to admitting publicly that Red Bull are paying the price for decisions made under his watch, to watching Verstappen's race engineer sign for McLaren while chief engineer Paul Monaghan prepares to leave for Cadillac. This is the story of what happens when the most dominant team in the modern era starts to collapse from the inside out. And what Mekies has been saying about it publicly is more revealing than anyone in Milton Keynes probably intended. This is the story of Laurent Mekies, the worst Red Bull season since 2008. And the question nobody wants to answer out loud: how long can he survive it? To understand the scale of what Mekies has inherited, you have to understand what Red Bull actually was before everything started going wrong. This was not simply a winning team. This was the most dominant technical organization Formula One had seen since the Ferrari of Michael Schumacher. Between 2021 and 2024, Red Bull won 4 consecutive Constructors' Championships. In 2023, they won 21 of 22 races. Max Verstappen had 4 World Championships. Adrian Newey, the most celebrated aerodynamicist in the sport's history, was producing cars so technically superior to the competition that rivals ran their own wind tunnel tests simply to understand how Red Bull were doing what they were doing. That was the team. That was the legacy. That was what Mekies was handed the keys to in July 2025. The problem is that by the time those keys landed in his hands, what he was inheriting was already a fundamentally different organization from the one that had won those championships. Newey had announced his departure in 2024. Jonathan Wheatley, Red Bull's sporting director, had left. Christian Horner, who had built the team from nothing, who had been its face and its voice and its strategic mind for 20 years, was fired in a shock announcement in July 2025. Helmut Marko, the man who had been at the heart of Red Bull's driver program for decades and who Verstappen had described as a father figure, saw his contract expire in December. And all of this had happened before a single lap of the 2026 season had been turned. Mekies was a quiet man walking into a very loud building. He had the technical credentials, years at Toro Rosso, a stint as safety director at the FIA, a role as sporting director and then racing director at Ferrari. He had taken the Racing Bulls team in January 2024 and done a credible job of restructuring a midfield operation that had been drifting. He was intelligent, composed, technically fluent, and by all accounts genuinely respected by the engineers who worked under him. When he arrived at Red Bull's Milton Keynes campus for the first time as team principal, he said publicly that he looked at Red Bull the way most people outside the team did, as the sharpest team in the world with the best people. The words of a man who was genuinely awed by what he was stepping into. But he had never run a team fighting for a championship at the very top of the sport. And the team he was now running, which had just gone through one of the most turbulent 12 months of its existence, was not in a position to teach him gently. The trigger for everything that has followed was the 2026 car, the RB22. Red Bull entered the new regulatory era, the biggest technical reset Formula One had seen in years, with completely new chassis rules and an overhaul of the hybrid power unit regulations, facing a challenge that no other manufacturer had attempted simultaneously. They were building their own power unit for the first time in their history. The Red Bull Powertrains project, developed in a new facility on the Milton Keynes campus and worked on in partnership with Ford on its electrical systems, was a monumental engineering undertaking that would have stretched any organization. And on top of that, they had made a deliberate decision in the second half of 2025, under Mekies' watch, to continue pushing development on the 2025 car at the cost of 2026 preparation in order to give Verstappen a genuine chance at a fifth world championship. Verstappen won 6 of the last 9 races in 2025. He pushed Lando Norris all the way to the absolute final round of the season, before falling 2 points short of a fifth world title. The championship fight that looked dead in the summer became one of the most dramatic end-of-season battles the sport had seen in years. By every emotional and competitive measure, the decision to keep fighting in 2025 was the right one. Mekies said so himself, and he was not wrong. But the price was paid in 2026, and it has been paid in full. Melbourne, the season opener, Verstappen crashed in qualifying and started 20th. He clawed his way to 6th at the flag in a result that felt, briefly, like a foundation to build from. Only Mercedes and Ferrari appeared genuinely quicker. The new Red Bull power unit, running for the first time in a competitive environment, showed promise. There was optimism in the paddock that Red Bull were not as far back as feared. Then China happened. Shanghai was, in the words of Verstappen himself, a disaster. He qualified 8th for the sprint, 1.7 seconds behind George Russell's pole time. 1.7 seconds. To put that into perspective, at the peak of Red Bull's dominance, the gap between Verstappen and the rest of the field was measured in tenths, not seconds. Hadjar qualified 10th. In the sprint race, Verstappen dropped to 15th from 8th off the line, citing total power loss off the clutch. In Sunday's Grand Prix, he retired with a coolant fault. Mekies stood in front of the cameras afterward and said what team principals say when things have gone badly wrong, and there is nothing else to say. He said Red Bull admitted to significant shortcomings. He said they had learned a great deal from the experience of running their own power unit in race conditions for the first time. He said he expected them to be more competitive from Japan onward. He was measured. He was composed. He was also, as it turned out, incorrect. In Japan, they were 7th in the race. Verstappen could not pass Pierre Gasly in the Alpine for the better part of the entire afternoon. The 4-time world champion was stuck behind a midfield car and could do nothing about it. The escalation from Melbourne to China to Japan was not the progression of a team finding its feet. It was the progression of a team discovering that its problems went deeper than it had admitted in public. The RB22 was overweight. Spanish publication Marca reported that the weight problem was so significant that it might not be solvable until 2027, when a new chassis could be incorporated. Ishaq Hadjar, the team's new second driver alongside Verstappen, was blunt about the situation in a way that team communication officers probably wished he had not been. He said simply, "We have a good power unit. The engine is good. The problem is that the chassis is terrible." That is not a quote you want a driver making in year 1 of a new regulatory era. That is a quote that follows a team principle around. This is the hinge moment of the entire Mekies story. Not the firing of Horner, not the departure of Newey, not the overweight chassis or the coolant faults in China. The hinge moment is what happened when the pressure started to build, and Mekies had to choose between admitting the full scale of the problem and managing the narrative carefully. He chose, in a now famous interview on the Beyond the Grid podcast, to be honest about the 2025 trade-off while simultaneously insisting the team was in full attack mode. He said the decision to push the 2025 car so late in the season had a cost on the starting point of the 2026 project. He said it was unavoidable. He said they would do it again, And then he said that this did not explain all their difficulties, that using it as an excuse would be wrong, and that nobody at Milton Keynes was looking for an excuse. F1 journalist Lawrence Barretto, speaking on the official Formula One YouTube channel, noted dryly that Mekies had begun making what he described as predictable excuses for Red Bull's problems. The framing landed because once that narrative attaches itself to a team principle, once the story becomes not just that the team is struggling, but that its leader is already constructing the rationale for why the struggle is not his fault, the position becomes untenable very quickly in Formula One. The sport does not wait for good explanations. It waits for good results. And Mekies, heading into the summer break with Red Bull 6th in the standings, has not yet produced enough of those to quiet the noise. And then, the departures continued. Gianpiero Lambiase, Verstappen's race engineer, the man who had been the Dutchman's closest technical ally through 4 World Championship campaigns, the person in arguably the most important relationship in the paddock after driver and car, announced he was leaving Red Bull for McLaren in 2028. This was not a contract dispute or a salary disagreement. This was a man choosing to leave the organization. That distinction matters. And then came the news that Paul Monaghan, one of Red Bull's chief engineers, was preparing to depart for Cadillac. Mekies stood in front of cameras at the Austrian Grand Prix and addressed both. He was categorical. He said the departures would not change Verstappen's decision about his future. He said the team was promoting from within and bringing in external talent. He said they had rebuilt before and would rebuild again. But here is what the numbers tell you about the scale of what Mekies is actually facing. Red Bull's 12-point haul from the first 2 races of 2026 was their lowest return since 2015. They are 6th in the Constructors' Championship, behind Haas and Alpine, teams operating on fractions of Red Bull's budget. Verstappen has an exit clause in his contract that is widely reported to become active if he falls outside the top 2 in the championship at a certain point in the season. He is currently 8th. His manager, Raymond Vermeulen, has said publicly and without ambiguity, Max was not born to compete in the midfield. Secret talks between Verstappen's camp and McLaren have been reported, though McLaren has stated it is fully committed to Norris and Piastri. Mekies, when asked whether Verstappen had given his word he would stay, gave an answer that was notable for what it did not say. He said, "I am not asking Max every week if he is going to stay. Max has made clear to us that he wants to continue with the team." That is not a confirmation. That is a man carefully managing a conversation he does not fully control. Guenther Steiner, the former Haas team principal and someone with deep connections to Red Bull's organization, gave an assessment of Mekies' position that was sympathetic but brutal in its honesty. He said Laurent has not got an easy job at the moment. He said all the pressure is on him because Max and the staff may be leaving. He said it started with Adrian Newey leaving. And then he said the thing that cuts deepest. If Max is leaving, that would not be good for the morale of the other people working there. Here is what you actually watched build across this entire season. The surface reading of Red Bull's 2026 crisis is about a regulatory reset that did not go their way, a new power unit that had teething issues, a car that started overweight and underpowered in a year when Mercedes and Ferrari found their feet first. But here is what is actually happening underneath it. The team that Mekies is running is not the team that Adrian Newey designed. It is not the team that Christian Horner built. It is not the team that Helmut Marko shepherded drivers through. The DNA of that organization has been systematically stripped out, either by departures, by corporate restructuring following the death of Dietrich Mateschitz, or by the decisions taken in the power struggle that preceded Horner's exit. The RB22 is the first Red Bull car with no Newey influence whatsoever. Not his concepts, not his instincts, not his fundamental design philosophy that produced the most efficient aerodynamic packages the sport had seen for over a decade. What Mekies has is a talented group of engineers who built their careers inside someone else's system and are now being asked to produce something comparable without the person who built that system. He has a driver whose contract has a contractual escape hatch. He has rival teams, specifically McLaren and Mercedes, who have made the new regulation transition dramatically better than Red Bull. He has a chassis his own driver described as terrible, and a weight problem that may not be fixable until next year. And he is doing all of this in his first full season as the head of a team of this size, having previously spent 18 months running a midfield outfit, and years before that as a sporting director, a safety regulator, and a race engineer. The pressure is on. In every meaningful sense of that phrase, the pressure is entirely on Laurent Mekies. Whether he can turn this around is the question that will define not just his own career, but the future trajectory of the most successful Formula One organization of the last decade. A major upgrade package brought to Austria showed enough promise that Verstappen finished second, his best result of the season. It was one data point, one race, one piece of evidence against a mountain of evidence pointing in the other direction. Mekies stood on the pit wall at Spielberg and said what he has said at every round of this season. He said the team had fire in every department. He said they were in full attack mode. He said they would get back to the front. He has to be right. Because the alternative, a Red Bull without Verstappen, without its key engineers, without its technical identity, without its championship momentum, is not a decline. It is the end of an era, and eras in Formula One rarely come back. The RB22 will either improve, or it will not. Verstappen will either stay or trigger his exit clause and go. The engineers currently walking out of the Milton Keynes campus toward rival teams will either be replaced by people of equivalent quality, or they will not. Laurent Mekies says there is fire in the building. What he needs to demonstrate, and quickly, is whether there is still genuine fire in the car. If you want to understand how Red Bull built the dynasty that Mekies is now trying to hold together, go back and watch the 2023 season. 21 wins from 22, the most dominant campaign in the sport's history. And then compare it to what you are watching now. That gap is the story of Mekies and his Red Bull.